Stay safe over there. We saw you escaping to a bunker earlier in the day when you were in Ashkelon, not far from Gaza. Thanks very much. Joining us now, the Israel Defense Forces International Spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. You know this better than I do. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying Israel is now in the midst of what he calls a significant operation that will take time. What exactly does that mean? What is the scope of this operation?
Well, good evening, Wolf. What that means, in fact, is that the IDF is conducting operations right now, but also preparing to enhance and broaden the scope of those operations in the future. We've been protecting Israeli civilians now for the last more than 24 hours against an almost unprecedented barrage of rockets against our civilians. The Iron Dome system has been delivering and has saved countless Israeli lives. But at the end of the day, the rocket fire that we saw towards central Israel, towards Tel Aviv, and really the heart of Israel, is of course totally unacceptable, something that the IDF will not stand for. And we are planning and conducting operations to make Hamas pay the price for their aggression against Israel.
I know you're launching airstrikes. What about a ground assault into Gaza? Is that likely?
I wouldn't get ahead of ourselves. I'd say that there's an abundance of military targets that we have planned, we have investigated and prepared ourselves to be able to strike them. All of those are pure classified military targets belonging to either the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, and we've been attacking those targets over the last 24 hours, and we have plans to continue and to broaden the scope of our attacks. Just as the Prime Minister said, and the Chief of the General Staff also reiterated, that this isn't going to end tomorrow, and the fact that Hamas allowed itself such a blatant act of aggression against Israel will not go unanswered, and we are attacking their targets.
The Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza says Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 32 people, including 10 children. Can you confirm there have been civilian casualties?
We are aware of the reports, I can say that. I can also say that we take every report of civilians and non-combatants that are killed or affected by fighting seriously, and it is our specific interest to minimize that number to the lowest possible number. I can say that we will never reach zero, and in any military activity in a densely populated urban area, just like Gaza, and in an area where the terrorist enemy uses civilians as their human shields and makes it virtually impossible to totally distinguish between enemies and non-combatants, it's a very difficult situation. But what we are doing is trying to abide by international law, trying to use the most precise ammunition at our disposal so as to cause minimal collateral damage. And you spoke about it before, you had it in the story. When we knock down large, significant infrastructure, then there's a process of warning and making sure that the target area is clear of non-combatants. And as you saw, a large military or a large structure that served Hamas's military purposes was hit, and there are no reports of casualties because we made sure that it was clear of civilians and non-combatants before we took it down. That's the level of our commitment. Are we going to be 100% perfect in this regard? I don't think that we will, but I can assure you and everybody watching that we take the issue seriously, and any reports of non-combatants involved in the killing are, of course, something that we want to avoid, which is, of course, totally different from how our enemies are operating, who are trying to cause civilian casualties in Israel, and unfortunately, we now have Israelis dead and wounded in the last hours of fighting.
The fighting continues. The Israel Defense Forces spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much for joining us. I know you got a lot going on. I want to immediately get to more on